to another College Chaps podcast. With the season well underway and the resulting chaos that has ensued, we thought no better than talk to a man who will be at the very epicenter of that chaos in just a few weeks' time. But first, we are the Chaps. I'm George. I'm joined by Ollie, with Alex up to his eyes in pre-season preparation. Oliver, hello. How are you, sir?
Well, when you said about the man at the centre of chaos, I thought you were talking about me, George. I was like, what chaos are you referring to? No, no chaos here. 25% of the college football season gone already for some teams. How disgusting is that? Like, I wrote that down. I wrote that sentence this morning, and I was like, that's devastating. But that means we're 25% of the way closer to a brand new extended college football playoff format. I think everyone's excited about that. And I guess today is well positioned to talk about that, right, George?
What a great segue. It's almost as if you're a professional at this. I tell you, we have been blessed with guests who operate at the very top of their careers. We've had conference commissioners, we've had national championship winning head coaches, New York Times bestsellers, and even a James Beard Award winner. But in a first for the Chaps, I can confidently say that we've never had a Lieutenant General of the US military as a guest before. The list of our guest career achievements is genuinely too long to list, but he is a three-star general of the US Air Force, and prior to taking up his current role was the superintendent of the US Air Force Service Academy. A four-year letterman of the Air Force football team, he has served at the Pentagon as well as special advisor to the White House. In 1985, the Falcons finished his senior season with a 12-1 overall record, a Blue Bonnet Bowl win over Texas, and a final ranking of 8th in the AP poll and 5th in the coaches poll. And if that wasn't enough, he's just taken over the role of College Football Playoff Executive Director from Bill Hancock. So it's awesome to give a warm Chaps welcome to Lieutenant General Rich Clark. Rich, hi, how are you?
How are you, George? I'm doing great. Ollie, it's good to meet you finally.
Well, it's great. We really appreciate you taking the time out. We know that you're a very, very busy man. So let's dive into this. Rich, you and I met at SEC Media Days, and you'll excuse the lack of college football playoff mention in this particular segment. But what really grabbed me was when you started talking about being a pilot, right? And you gave us a little bit of an insight into your time as a pilot. But what really intrigued me was your talk about doing the flyovers at football games. And I think you
Oh
said
yeah.
you were the first person to put your hand up whenever there was a flyover to be had. We've been privileged enough to see flyovers in the UK and the Europe and the US. So before we get to talk about college football playoff, which inevitably we're going to do, tell us a little bit about your favourite kind of flyover memories and how does it feel to fly over, the biggest stadium in the US?
Oh boy, that was always a treat for me. As a pilot, to kind of bring football and flying together at one time was just amazing. And I remember one in particular. I was a B-1 bomber pilot, and we had uh, an opportunity to fly over the Air Force Navy game, and this was 12 years after I had graduated. And so the flyby was it was one B-1 and two F-15 fighters on the wing. So we had a B-1 in the middle, two F-15s on the wings, and our only we had two things that we had to do. One, we had to stay below supersonic airspeed, so we couldn't go above 1.0 Mach. So I set 0.95. I was the formation lead. 0.95 Mach was our highest speed, and 400 feet high was our lowest altitude. So that makes for a pretty exciting flyby. This is 25 years ago, so things are a little different now. Uh, but we're flying over, and air traffic control, for whatever reason, made us stay really high because there was some traffic below, and we couldn't get down to altitude the way we had practiced it because we actually got a practice run. And so we're at altitude, and time's getting close, and we have to hit it right at the national anthem, the last note of the national anthem. So it's to the second. And so we're orbiting high, and I'm like, oh, come on, you got to let us down so we can start our push in. And they finally let us in. So we drop right down to 400 feet. And at the Air Force Academy, it's a bowl stadium. And when you get low and you're kind of far out, it's hard to see a bowl because it's just like plan form. You can't really see it that well. And for a minute there, I was a little bit panicked. I was trying to find the stadium because I'm leading the formation, and then I found it. But then we were about maybe 3 seconds late. So I pushed the power up as fast as we could go. We were doing about 0.96, 0.97 Mach. We're at 400 feet. We have it nailed, and we're flying over the stadium, and we get over it, and then we were doing a climbing turn out of the stadium. And so I start my climb. We're still at 0.6 Mach or 0.96 Mach, and the F-15 on my wing goes F-15-2 supersonic. And I was like, oh my gosh, because he's on the outside of the turn. So he's got to go a little bit faster to keep the formation together. And he went supersonic. And I knew I was dead, because when you go supersonic, bad things happen. Windows break, babies cry, car horns go off. But the crowd went wild. I saw a film of it afterwards. I had friends texting or writing. We didn't do text back then, sending me emails and stuff. And people were like, that was the best flyby ever. It was just awesome. We didn't break any windows in the stadium, but when I landed, my boss was waiting for me in the office and said, what happened? I got a pass, but I got in a little bit of trouble, but it was worth it because that was the best flyby ever.
That I can confidently say that's the best story we've ever had on this podcast, right? We've had 198 episodes. That is by far the best story. I guess, look, when you're doing a flyby over a normal football stadium, you probably get away with it because everyone's impressed by a flyby. But when you're doing the Army Navy game, there's no room for error there. Everybody's watching you with a microscope. Yeah.
You are so right. You are so right. That is an opportunity for ridicule or praise. You're getting one or the other. There's nothing in between.
Amazing. Let's bridge the gap between that experience and your playing experience at Air Force, because you were part of a very successful Air Force team, and Air Force at the moment is very much in the national eye because of college football realignment and what is going to happen with the Falcons going forward. But you were part of that 12-1 team, as George said in the introduction. Voted in the top 10 AP poll. Just incredible achievements for the program while you were there. How was that experience? And I guess, how did that help you? It was your senior season when you had that experience. How did that help you as you took on leadership roles later in life?
It was amazing. I mean, obviously, having the success that we had really lifted our team in prominence, I think nationally. But more importantly, we were a very tight-knit team. I mean, we were all together. We were seniors. We had a huge number of seniors on the team that year. And, when you build bonds with someone like that, with a group of people like that, it's really special. In fact, we're all still friends. A lot of them were at my retirement just 3 months ago. And so I think you learn things on the field. You learn about overcoming adversity. You learn about training to fight and win. You learn about teamwork. But I think those lessons are magnified when you have huge success, right? When you see the fruits of those efforts come to bear, you're like, this works, and this is how I'm going to live my life, and this is how I'm going to put my effort into everything that I do. So for all of us, not just me, but I think for all of us on the team, we all learned lessons about ourselves, character lessons, teamwork lessons, and it's paid off because there's a lot of success. I think we had 6 journal officers on that team, which is kind of unheard of, and for such a small group of people. So that was pretty awesome. I will say this, though, if that team was around during the 12-team playoff, or if we had the 12-team playoff back then, we'd have been in it. We were ranked 8. George mentioned we were ranked 8th in one poll and 5th in the other. So we would have been hosting a campus playoff game at the Air Force Academy. That would have been the most spectacular game that ever happened there in our history. So it does give me a little bit of, a special feeling about what this playoff could really mean to certain student athletes and different institutions that have the opportunity to really excel. So, those years were amazing for me, taught me a lot about football, taught me a lot about life, but really, I think it gives me an inkling into what some of our teams are going to get to experience because of this 12-team playoff.
You talked when you were telling us your flyover story. You were talking about the fact that you didn't text back then, and it kind of reminds us that things have moved on quite significantly, and everything evolves, right? And you touched on there about the Air Force team, what they would be like in today's environment. College football has changed radically in that period of time. Do you think a service academy can progress? Do you think they can repeat what Air Force did back then? Do you think they can become a playoff team?
Well, I'll say this. I think the path is clearer than it has been before. The way that a service academy team would get in, I believe, is probably as a conference champion. And now all three service academies are actually in conferences. Army and Navy are both in the American, and Air Force in the Mountain West. So there's an opportunity there for those teams to be conference champions, and then they have to be one of the top 5 conference champions on top of that. So there is a path, and I think it's probably a clearer path than we've had in the past. Otherwise, they would have, they were going to have to be in the top 4 teams in the country, and that probably a tougher road for a service academy. But conference champion, and then maybe being a convincing conference champion is not out of the question.
We've touched on the excuse me. We've touched on the expansion to 12 teams a couple of times already, while talking, and this is arguably the biggest year for college football in recent memory, if not multiple decades, due to the expansion of the college football playoff format. You're obviously at the forefront of that change now. What are some of the biggest challenges that you feel the College Football Playoff Committee faces this year as the format changes from 4 teams like we've had since 2014 to a 12-team playoff this year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the number one challenge is there's going to be very small margin as teams are ranked. You're going to find we're going to have a lot of really great teams at the top, and the committee's going to have a challenge to really differentiate between them, because ranking matters so that we can get to the phase of formulating the standings for the teams. Mm-hmm. And I want to pause right there. There's a difference between ranking and standing. So the rank is the 1 through 25, and then we'll take those teams and put them in 1 through 12 so that we can bracket them. And the ranking may not be equivalent to how we put them into the standings. So a little bit of a difference there, but the committee's going to really have to do a good job of differentiating between teams that aren't in the same conferences, that are facing different opponents, but really judging who the best teams are. And I think that's going to be really, really hard, but very important, because you can't just go by record. It can't just be because a team is undefeated that they're considered one of the best teams in the country. They may be one of the best, but are they one of the 12 best? And that's the question that they're going to have to answer and really work through. But I'll say they have a lot of data at their fingertips. They're a very sophisticated group of people with a lot of experience in college football. So they're up to the task, but it's not an easy task by any stretch. So I do think that will be difficult for them. And there's also going to be the difficulty of explaining to people why a team that was ranked 12 isn't in the playoff, because we, the conference commissioners, value conference champions, and they wanted to include the 5 top conference champions into the playoff bracket. So that means that the 5 conference champions will go in first, and then the next 7 at-large teams. So if you think about it this way, just because a team is 12 doesn't mean that they're going to automatically ranked 12 doesn't mean that they're going to automatically be. I was saying standings before. What I meant to say was seeding. They're not going to be seeded as number 12 because you're going to have those top 5 conference champions in the bracket. So that is going to be something I think is going to be a little bit of a challenge for people to get used to. But as they see it happen, hopefully they will understand that this is a value. Conference championships mean something. And if we want the season to matter and what teams actually accomplish in the season, we have to take that into consideration. So that'll be something that I think the fans are going to have to understand. But when they see it happen, I think it'll help. It'll make it pretty clear why this is the way that the commissioners laid out the format.
We saw you on College Game Day recently, and you talked about picking the best 25, and it kind of follows on from what you've just said, and using strength of schedule, head to head, and common opponents. Not only is this an interesting season because of the expansion, but conferences have gone through significant change also over the past 12 months. How much of a challenge does the conference expansion, how much of a challenge does that present to the playoff committee, do you think?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think that it complicates their job too much, but it does matter because their job, once again, regardless of conference, is to pick the 25 best teams. And so regardless of what conference they're in, the commissioners have to be, I think, sort of agnostic to conference and just pick them on their body of work. You know, the things that they've done, the types of wins that they've had, common opponents that they've played, head-to-head matchups, those kinds of things are going to matter. So regardless of what conference they're in, the commissioners have to be able to compare the data, the information that they have, the eye test, because they watch these games very closely. But regardless of the conference, they're going to have to sort through it and pick out the top 25. And that is regardless of the conference shakeup. They'll be able to do that based on the games that those teams do play.
It's an interesting point. Excuse me. And it leads me on nicely to my next question, because we're big fans of the group of five conferences. And we recently had Mountain West Commissioner Gloria Navarez on this show. And we talked about ranking the top 25 teams. We talked about seedings and rankings and how people not necessarily understand how that format might shape up. And I think another thing people don't understand is there is every potential. The five conference champions doesn't necessarily mean Power Four plus one group of five. There's every legality and legislation that says multiple group of five teams champions could get in if they were ranked higher. That a lot of people don't understand. She seemed very bullish on the Mountain West chances when we talked to her. Do you think, as in your role and looking at college football as a wider view, there is a potential that more than one group of five team could make it into the college football playoff this year?
Well, so I'll say that the format is built that way, right? The format allows for that to happen. Whether it will is really hard for me to say, especially right now with the way that the season is shaping up. And to be very honest, history would tell us that there's probably going to be one group of five champion in the playoff, but that's history, right? And there's no telling what could actually happen because, I mean, the scenario could be you have a conference that is where people are very evenly yoked within the conference, right? And so you have a conference champion that's 8-4 in one of the A4 conferences. And then you have a group of five conference or two where you have two undefeated champions that play a really strong record and they have a good body of work and they actually rank higher than that 8-4 conference champion. It could happen. Now, whether it does, hard to say. It'd be unwise for me to make a prediction now about it, but I think what I kind of laid out is how it might happen, because you very well could have an 8-4 conference champion that ranks lower than a couple of the group of five champions. So it's possible, and the format would be very much intact, and the integrity of the format would be in place if that did happen.
And not to dwell too much on what happened last year, because that's not your issue. but I guess last year proved that anything could happen, right? We saw the situation with Florida State. You're right. The past is no guide to what the future is going to give us. So I hope your job is very straightforward this year, but in many ways it might not be. You touched a little bit when you're talking about Air Force. You touched a little bit about campus games, and I have to say, everyone I've spoken to about the expansion of the playoff is very excited to have games on campus, and I think that's one of the big attractions of the expansion. I just wanted to ask you, well, we had you on and had the opportunity, as the focus kind of shifts, as it invariably will do, to the expanded playoff. How do you ensure the credibility of the bowl games, and how do you ensure that the bowl games are protected going forward?
No, that's another very good question, a good issue to bring up. But first, thanks for not making me relive the past, because last year was tough. I'm glad we don't have to go there. But I think the bowl games, and from my perspective, well, first I'll go back to my history, right? We went to 4 bowl games while I was a player, and I remember those games like they were highlights of my life, especially up to that point. In fact, I still have, back then they give you a bowl watch, and it had that, you remember those Twist-a-Flex watch bands? They were metal, but they kind of bent around like they were rubber. I still have those. My wife calls them trinkets. I call them treasures. They're just awesome. But those bowl games were amazing, and they were amazing for me, my teammates, our families. They're just incredible, and they have been the richness and the tradition of college football for 100 years. I mean, coming up on 100 years anyway. So I think the commissioners and many of us fans, and me included, believe in what the bowl games bring, and the pageantry of them, the meaning of them, and the history of them. And to let them go, I think would be, it would take away from college football as a whole. So the commissioners were very adamant about having the bowl games be played in the quarterfinals and the semifinals, and they're the great bowl games, the New Year's Six. And I'll say this just from a pragmatic point of view, it would be hard if you had campus games all the way through the playoffs. Because you start to have people, students are not on campus anymore. Mm-hmm. People are on vacation. Weather's starting to be a factor. Whereas the bowl games are amazing game operators. They know how to put a game on. They know how to make it grand and amazing. We have to keep the bowl games in place. That is my perspective on it. Now, I don't always get the last vote on these kinds of things, but from my point of view, having the bowl games and making them relevant is really important. And I think this format does make certainly the New Year's Six bowl games a lot more relevant. And I hope that even the other bowl games bring on some relevancy, because there's still going to be great teams out there that don't make the playoff. And to be able to watch them compete as well is going to be amazing. So I'm always a fan of the bowl season, and I hope that it stays intact as it has for 100 years in college football.
Yeah, I think we all share that same sentiment that bowl season is something that needs to be protected, whatever format that might be. And obviously, we're seeing with name, image, and likeness that a lot of bowl games are using that now to ensure that a high level of competition in those games. We're going to have the longest college football season that we've ever had, with the national championship on January the 21st, 2025 this year. When we get there, as many weeks as it is now, what will success look like for you and for the rest of the team involved with organising the college football playoff this year look like?
Well, I think success will look like a great bracket that we put together, right, based on the ranking, and that people actually understand why the teams that are in it are in it. And there's not a huge amount of controversy. I mean, there has to be some controversy. It's still college football, right? And people have to argue for their team. It wouldn't be any fun if we didn't, but not controversy that's detrimental, where people question the integrity of the process. We want people to understand, to be educated, but also to believe in the process. So that's one thing. The other thing is that all the games go without a hitch, and that they are as spectacular from the campus games that are in the first round through the bowl games and right up to the championship game. So if those games are also just the best matchups that the country's seen, then that's going to be success. And, for me, I just want to see a close game, every one of those games. I mean, if we go into overtime in all of them, I'd be just fine with that. Don't say that to ESPN; they'll probably be mad. But I just want amazing games where people just go, "Holy mackerel! Did you see that game yesterday?" And that they understand why the teams that are in it were in it. So we're excited, and our team is already working on the campus games to make sure that all of those institutions, that every institution, 134 FBS teams understand the expectations of putting on a campus game if they're one of those selected for the first round. So we're working on it, and we're going to make sure that we do our part to make it amazing. But success looks something like that. And for the broader point, I think we'll know success when we see it. Sometimes you have to, it's the first time ever, right? So we think we know what it looks like, but I'm hoping that we exceed expectations in such a big way that people just go, I never imagined it could be that good.
Well, the sign of a really good guest is that we could talk to the guest for hours, and we could, if nothing else, to go back and talk to you about more of your flyover stories. Normally at this point in the podcast, we ask our guests what they're working on and what we can look forward to reading or hearing over the coming months. But actually, the question I want to ask you, Rich, is it's important to designate that you're not part of the committee as such. So what do your Saturdays look like going forward in the football season? What do you do on a Saturday?
Well, for these first few Saturdays, I've been going to games. I try to alternate though, because like last week I went to Baylor Air Force, and I went to A&M, Notre Dame. I have a couple of other games planned, but what I realize is when I go to games that I actually see fewer games because I don't have my TV in front of me, And so on the Saturdays that I've been at home, I'm watching football all day. And it's amazing because I go, I'm actually doing my job right now. This is what I get paid to do. There's nothing better. And so I've been honestly watching with a different eye, though, because we're seeing the season sort of form up. And I'll even mention it. We're like already 25% into the season. It's crazy. And into the regular season anyway. And so I'm really watching to see it form up and getting ready, because by week 7, after that, we start doing the selections. So we need to really be following the season and understanding what's going on. And even though I'm not a voting member, I'm still an engaged member and an involved member, and as is the rest of our team. So we're just tracking it and keeping up with the great news and seeing how things are forming up. So it's pretty cool to have this as my job.
You better believe it. Have you got more screens now than you had before?
Oh yeah. I signed up for YouTube TV. Oh, can I say that out loud? I don't know. Yeah. where you could get the multiverse and watch 4 games. That is amazing. That is amazing. So if you have 4 screens, you got 16 games. Sensory overload, right?
You've set a new bar. You set a new bar for Ollie. Normally, wait, 3 screens, 4 screens. Have you got 4?
Four screens normally on a Saturday, but I think I need to up my game by the sound of it.
Well, you can catch up to me sometime, Ollie. I'll teach you some tricks there. Nah, it's pretty good though. I do love to just watch the games. I love going back and forth and just trying to keep up with it. So it's pretty cool to have this as what I do for a living. Couldn't ask for better.
Absolutely. Sadly, that's all the time we've got to speak to the executive director, and it's been awesome to have him on. As you know, Rich joins a long list of truly awesome guests on this pod. So if you haven't, please catch up on the archive and please subscribe, rate, and review for the next lot. You can follow us on social media. But thanks again to Rich and Ollie for the brilliant input. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and well, and catch you all next time.